the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World for the grand opening of EPCOT Center, Mutual Radio presents The Larry King Show, featuring guests from around the world and calls from all across America. And now, Network Radio's favorite interviewer, Larry King.
Thank you very much, Fred Larry, and good evening, everybody, on this Friday night. Saturday morning across America. This is our wind-up night here at EPCOT in Walt Disney World. A great black tie party tonight to officially commemorate this weekend, which will officially open EPCOT, which is the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And the Walt Disney folks and everybody have gone out of their way to see that we've had a great time. We had a wonderful broadcast last night and are really looking forward to tonight's. Next Monday and Tuesday, we'll come to you from Philadelphia, the Franklin Plaza Hotel. It is the 60th anniversary of WCAU Radio. We have an outstanding lineup of guests, and you're asked to contact the station for tickets on that. That's Monday and Tuesday night from the Franklin Plaza Hotel in Philadelphia. A very nice crowd on hand here tonight at the Contemporary Hotel. Our guest tonight, my all-time broadcast hero. We will meet in a moment, the great Red Barber, the best baseball announcer who ever lived, and the author of a great new book, 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball, the intertwining of Mr. Barber and the coming to baseball and to integration of Jackie Robinson and the major leagues, the year that Leo DeRocha was suspended by the commissioner. Bert Schotten took over a tremendous World Series, an incredible season, a season that changed America. Red Barber in a moment. Then the great band leader Woody Herman will be with us. They were one of 5 bands, Woody Herman and the Herd, that entertained here tonight at EPCOT. And then John Hench, who is the creative genius behind Disney World and EPCOT. Nice crowd on hand, including the top brass of the network. Martin Rubenstein is here with his lovely wife, Cora. Jack and Mrs. Clements is here as well, Senior Vice President. Tom O'Brien, our Executive Vice President in charge of news and the executive producer of this program. Some nice old friends, including Bebe Rebozo from Miami, and it's nice to see Bebe again. And we welcome to our microphones. Let's hear it for Red Barber, my all-time hero. I grew up listening to Red Barber, grew up in Brooklyn, kept a scrapbook of the 1947 season. Red is in. Are you fully retired?
I was fully retired, Larry, because when I got to be 65, I soon discovered that I had to be retired. Otherwise, I'd lose Social Security and AFTRA pension and Screen Actors Guild pension. But on those 7 years of retirement, I kept thinking what I wanted to do when I finally got old enough to go back to work again at age 72. And that was to do this book that you just very kindly referred to. And you told me earlier, I think, that you kept a scrapbook on that year.
I was 14 years old. I kept a scrapbook of every Dodger game played that season in a book. See, game by, I didn't know it was going to be that important a year. I just caught on to them and hung and kept the New York Daily News. Every day, Dick Young wrote most of the copy.
Mm-hmm. Larry, I don't want to waste your time talking about the book, except nobody in 1947 knew that it was going to be that important a year. They just knew that Mr. Rickey was doing something when he broke the color line, and not too many people in baseball liked it at all. And one of the strong reasons that motivated me to do the book was that so many people have forgotten today that it was an important year. It became an important year historically. When you think about the fact that it opened the door for black athletes in the Deep South, it all traces right back to 1947.
Indeed, Roger Wilkins was with us the other night, the nephew of Roy Wilkins. He said that Jackie Robinson coming to baseball was much more important than a baseball story. It was much larger than a sports story.
Well, I think the post office realized that. They just put him on a stamp. He's the first American athlete to go on a stamp.
He dramatically changed this picture in America, Jackie Robinson.
And the amazing thing with the personalities of the two men, Rickey was the only man who was going to do it, and Robinson was the only fellow, I think, who could do it.
And how he hid that personality, because he had to really take it in those first 3 years. He couldn't argue, he couldn't fight, he couldn't yell. And of course, we've came to know him as a great competitor, and he was really the opposite of the way he had to be.
Well, Mr. Rickey had his scouts determine. Mr. Rickey never saw Robinson play a game of baseball until after he had signed him to a Montreal contract. He had his chief scouts determine that Robinson had the physical abilities. But Ricky himself, in his office at 215 Montague Street in Brooklyn, had to determine, which he did in a 3-hour session, whether Robinson was the man spiritually. And at the end of the 3 hours, he said to Robinson, there's only one way that you can do this, and that is you must not answer back for 3 years. And then he looked at Robinson and said, do you think you can do it? And Robinson looked right back and said, I've got to do it. And there it went.
Well, he did. Now, the mutual broadcasting system is no stranger to you.
Larry, you were talking in your introduction, and it made me sort of feel that by the changes and chances of this mortal life, I'm sort of a historical figure. I grew up, you don't know this, I grew up just 25 miles north of here in Sanford. I used to come to Orlando when it was a small town and play high school baseball and high school football. Where Disney World is now, when I was growing up, was nothing but pine trees and palmettos and swamps, and the cows from around Kissimmee used to wander around through here. The land was practically worthless.
I know you went to the University of Florida.
Yeah, I went to the University of Florida from Sanford. But also, you're talking about mutual. The first sporting event that was on the Mutual Network was the first night game in baseball in May of 1935 from Cincinnati, which I broadcast. And Mutual's first World Series was in 1935, the Cubs and the Dodgers, which Bob Elson and I broadcast. So, yes, I'm a little familiar with Mutual.
That was Mutual's first sports broadcast.
The first night game in baseball was Mutual's first broadcast. They had 4 stations. Freddie Weber was putting the network together.
They had WGN Chicago.
And WOR in New York. They had a station in Detroit.
XYZ.
Yes, and WLW in Cincinnati, which made the network. At that time, WLW had 500,000 watts power. That was a network in itself. And the way Mutual got on the World Series that fall. You see, in those days, the World Series was not exclusive. NBC was on it, the CBS was on it. You mentioned WCAU. One of their boys was on the World Series for quite a while, Bill Dyer. Well, anyhow, Freddie Weber applied to Judge Landis for permission to broadcast. And Landis says, you're not a network, and let me know about your stations. Well, Weber said, I've got the station in Detroit, I've got the station in New York, I've got the station in Chicago. Landis says, that's not a network. Weber says, suppose I get WLW? Landis said, if you can get WLW, you're a network. And that's how Mutual got his first World Series and went on from there.
So the first night game ever played was the first broadcast of an athletic contest on this network.
Yep.
And you did the first World Series for him.
I did the first night game, and Elson and I worked on the first World Series.
Did they pay you well?
Nothing.
Well, nothing's changed. Well, a little joke, right? Little joke, Marty. We'll be back with Red Barber. His new book is 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball. It's published by Doubleday. We'll return after these messages.
Portions of this program are being brought to you by the makers of V8 vegetable juice and by International Harvester.
In the field and over the road, International will be there to carry the load. We're not giving in, we're going on.
Just ask North American Van Lines. They just invested $16 million in our future and theirs. They bought 275 International trucks. Why? Because International makes some of the most fuel-efficient, most dependable, most hard-working trucks on the road. That's why companies like North American Van Lines are investing in International Harvester, because we can help them get the most out of that investment. Today, International Harvester is trimmer and tougher than ever before. We're not giving in, we're going on.
International will be there to carry the load. We're not giving in, we're going on.
International Harvester.
Thanks, waiter. I've had enough. How can you refuse such great food? To stay thin. Oh, wish I could lose weight. Go on a diet. With diet pills, something different. The AIDS diet plan. AIDS, appetite suppressant candy cubes.
Both AIDS cubes and diet pills help curb hunger, but AIDS do more. Help satisfy your need to taste, chew, and enjoy.
Say when. When? So soon? You're eating like a bird. Thanks to AIDS.
AIDS help curb hunger and satisfy taste. Use only as directed.
one flight and you're out of breath?
I smoke, remember?
Oh, I wish you'd quit.
You know I've tried.
Then use Bantron.
Bantron smoking deterrent tablets help you break the cigarette habit because they help ease your craving for nicotine. The more you want to stop smoking, the more Bantron helps.
Come on, one more lap.
Oh, you're not out of breath.
The less I smoke, the better I feel.
Bantron helps you break the cigarette habit. Use only as directed.
From the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World for the opening of EPCOT Center, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Here again, Larry King.
Thank you very much, Fred Lowry. We're at Walt Disney World. And by the way, tonight's origination from Walt Disney World was arranged in exchange for promotional considerations. Our special guest to open the program tonight is Red Barber. In my humble opinion, the best baseball broadcaster who ever lived. Mr. Barber is the author of a new book, 1947, The Year All Hell Broke Loose in Baseball. It's published by Doubleday. By the way, we'll go to calls fairly early tonight because we know many of you would like to talk to Red. And we might also allow anybody here in the audience at the hotel who might have some questions to ask them as well. If you want to call in early, the number remains the same, 703-685-2177. When we're in Los Angeles in a couple weeks, we're going to broadcast from the Los Angeles Sheraton Universal, and one of our guests will be Vince Scully. You hired Vince Scully, did you not? For
Yes.
CBS, right?
That's right.
Tell that story.
Well, again, Larry, this is what I said earlier about the changes and chances of this mortal life. We were three of us at Brooklyn, Connie Desmond, Ernie Harwell, and I, through the season of 1949. Ernie had joined us in 1948. And after the season of 49, Harwell got the opportunity to go over to the Polo Grounds with Russ Hodges and become, you might say, a co-broadcaster rather than be the third man in the three-man setup. And we were glad for him, but that meant that we needed somebody else, Connie and I. And I had sort of had the idea kicking around that television hadn't come along too strongly then, and we didn't need an all-out professional third broadcaster. I had the idea that it would be rather interesting if we could find a promising young fella and sort of train him on the air. And I talked to Mr. Rickey about it, and he said, well, it's a good idea, but you'll have to find the right man. And we were doing the football roundup on CBS in those days. And Ted Church was director of news, and I was then the director of sports for CBS. And one morning, Church came in my office, and he had this young red-headed fellow with him, and he said, Red, this is Vince Scully, who's been doing some relief announcing on our CBS station, WTOP, down in Washington this summer, and he's looking for a job. He just came to see me, and he recently graduated from Fordham. And so with that, Church walked out. He didn't have anything for him. And I didn't have anything either. We didn't carry any staff at 485 Madison. But I talked with Vince for a while, and he made a very favorable impression. But as I said, we had nothing for him. I didn't take down his name, address, phone number, or anything else, and he left. Well, a couple of weeks later, there was a spot that came up on the football roundup. We used to employ about 75 to 85 people on that. It was show all across the country, and we had a spot up in Boston. And we couldn't get a CBS announcer up there, so I said to John Doe, my associate, you know that red-headed fellow that was in here? He could do that thing up there at Boston, I bet you. And I said, go around and ask Ted Church what his name is to get his phone number. Well, Doe came back and said, Church hasn't got his name and phone number. And then I remembered the Church had said he graduated from Fordham. And I knew that Jack Coffey, the graduate manager of athletics up there, had a fantastic memory. He used to remember not only people's names, but their birthdays. So I said to Doe, John, call Coffey up at Fordham. Sure enough, Coffey came up with his name and phone number. And we sent Scully up to Boston, and he did a wonderful job up there. But that was all we had for him then. And then I got the word, I was out at the end of the football season doing a California-Stanford football game. And at halftime, the engineer handed me a note and said, Ernie Harwell has joined Russ Hodges at the Polo Ground. So, flying back to New York, kept thinking, well, who are we going to get? Who are we going to get for the third man? And then I said, that red-headed fellow that went up to Boston did a good job, so sent for him. And talked to him a little bit, and I said, would you be interested? Well, his eyes got big as teacups. So I said, you'll have to go and talk to Mr. Rickey. Well, in about an hour, Mr. Rickey called back, and he said, Walter, he always called me Walter. He said, Walter, you found the right man. And that was the beginning. And so Scully came on the air, and as you remember, Larry, Connie and I presented him to the public for just what he was, and we trained him on the air. If he did something we thought was not the right technique or something else, well, we'd straighten it out right over the air, but we didn't have to do it often because he was so quick. His mind was so quick. You heard him on the World Series with Sparky Anderson. It's amazing that he's right on top of it. He was more accurate doing the radio against the TV picture than the TV fellows were themselves.
Is he the best?
He is undoubtedly the best. No question.
Nobody in his league.
There is nobody close to Scully.
What did you always take well to baseball? I mean, nobody broadcast a baseball game like Red Barber. And as Scully recently said in an interview, everything he ever learned, he learned from you. And in fact, in the recent World Series, Scully described your description of a near rainout.
Yes.
In Brooklyn, where you were describing the rain.
No, the rain was coming across the field up in Boston.
And you had the first drop hit Pee Wee Reese's cap.
That's right, just as he picked up a ground ball and threw it over to first base. And it was a storm that you could see coming. And you knew and this was the last out of the fifth inning, which meant it was an official game. And it was the end of the season, and if you hadn't gotten the game in, it wouldn't have counted.
Scully described that on radio. You're doing that as an example of great broadcasting. I mean, did you always take to baseball? Did it come naturally to you to do it that well?
Larry, I told you at the beginning of this that you didn't know it, but I came from 25 miles up the road. We played sandlot ball up there at Sanford. We made our own entertainment. Went to the Boy Scout camp, and we were always playing baseball or kicking a football or something. And I played high school baseball and always enjoyed it. And one of the things we used to do in the summertime was one fellow would get the Spalding guide, and another fellow would get the Reach guide, and we'd try and stump each other. Yes, I always liked baseball, and I always was interested in reading about the great stars.
But I mean broadcasting it. Did it come that easily to you? It sounded effortless.
No, Larry. You're doing this show sounds effortless.
No, you're doing baseball was effortless.
No, listen. There is no such thing as doing a good job effortlessly. You learn, you practice, you work at it, you prepare yourself. I think that an ad-lib baseball game, you do 75% of the work before you ever go to the booth. Just like you sit up here at this desk, and apparently you've got no notes, and these people here are mystified how you do it, but you spent a little time today before you got here, and you spent a few years before you got here.
You pay a lot of dues. But
That's right.
You did it so well. I mean, nobody ever did baseball like you did baseball. For the people of Brooklyn, now explain that, why the people of Brooklyn took to a little old Southern boy.
The people of Brooklyn didn't take so much to a little old Southern boy, Larry, as you had. This is almost, you might say, a session in sociology or in geography or in history. Brooklyn was one of the great cities in the United States on its own until 1898, when against its will, the state legislature of New York made it join the city of New York because of the development of the building of the bridges and the subways and the water system, etc. And there are people, when I got to Brooklyn in 1939, that still resented being a part of the city of New York. And Brooklyn didn't have a railroad terminal as New York did. It didn't have those skyscrapers. It didn't have the Broadway theaters. It didn't have the big banks. And Brooklyn was sort of a laughing stock. It was called the bedroom of New York. The one thing that Brooklyn had that was its pride, the Brooklyn Dodgers. And when the Dodgers played the Giants, Brooklyn was in business. And also you had a dry spell for 5 years. The three New York teams did not permit any broadcasting of their home games for 5 years, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. So when MacPhail broke that ban and put the Dodgers on the air in 1939, here was Brooklyn just ready to hear its Dodgers, and MacPhail had a 50,000-watt station, WOR, and Brooklyn, for maybe you might say the first time, was even with Manhattan and with the Giants, and the Dodger broadcasts were just something that was of civic value to Brooklyn.
But your affinity with the people of Brooklyn, who are certainly not Southern colloquial.
Larry, let me say this. The people in Brooklyn didn't understand the accent for a while, but it didn't bother them too much. But they did understand, I think, from the very first inning that I knew my business. I was pretty well trained. MacPhail knew I knew it. That's why he brought me in from Cincinnati. I'd worked under him for 3 years out there. And I did know my business. I'd been on 4 World Series. And I made it also my business, in addition to trying to know something about the ballpark. Every time there was an open day, I got Lana, my wife, and our daughter Sarah, and we got in the automobile, and we just drove all around Brooklyn. I made it my business to learn as much as I could about the borough of Brooklyn. So it wasn't long before the people in Brooklyn began to say, well, he speaks sort of funny, but he's one of us. He knows this. He knows these different places.
Did anybody ever tell you when you started that the accent wouldn't work?
Yes, Larry, you wouldn't remember it, but there was a rather bitter situation with the New York and Brooklyn writers, especially the Brooklyn writers. Eddie Zeltner was one of a lot of the writers, when MacPhail announced he was going to broadcast, they felt that they should get the job. And when MacPhail brought me in with a southern accent, they resented it, and they predicted in print that my accent would defeat the whole thing.
That didn't work. Did anyone in broadcasting ever
Well,
tell you?
I'll go this far. It remained. It was pretty bitter for a while with the writers. So one day I said to MacPhail, I said, Larry, if you don't mind, I'm going to do something. He said, what are you going to do? I said, these New York writers that have been taking pot shots at me and at the broadcast, and it's your decision to bring me in. I said, I'm going to invite every one of the New York writers to do the 5th inning of a ball game here at Brooklyn, day by day. And after the writers had a little fling up there, I remember Arch Murray, a double play started, and all of a sudden he said, hey, Red, you take it. So that cured it. That ended it.
We're going to give you the opportunity to talk to Red Barber. His new book, as I often heard, if you know this program, I normally do not read the books and like to approach it from the top, but I got this book the first day it was available and read it in 2 days. It's a great read, a great book, and a very important book. We'll ask Red about the kid from Mississippi and Florida who had to entertain the broadcasts of games that involved integrating baseball and how that affected him personally, and we'll go to your phone calls as well. My guest is Red Barber. The book from Doubleday is 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball. And later we'll meet Woody Herman. This is the Larry King Show. This is the official opening weekend of EPCOT, this tremendous facility built by the folks from Disney, and we're broadcasting from the Contemporary Hotel at Disney World. EPCOT will officially be opened, although it has been open to the public since October 1st, this Sunday afternoon. This is the Larry King Show. We'll be right back with the old redhead Walter Lanier, Red Barber. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System, your network for news and sports.
Video dating services have taken hold in New York and Los Angeles. Sneak Preview's dating service is now here in Chicago to serve you. Video dating services do not attract lonely hearts or wallflowers. The concept is most attractive to people who are active, energetic, on the move, just like you. And in Sneak Previews, what you see is what you get. What you get is the most innovative way of meeting new people today. Sneak Previews members see audio-visual presentations of each other. And if they're interested in meeting, Sneak Previews brings them together. Sneak Previews is the confidential, time-saving, hassle-free way to meet and date the kind of people that you want to date. Who knows, you might meet the person of your dreams. Sneak Previews is your chance to have fun and meet many interesting people. Call Sneak Previews dating service now, 266-8995. Speak to one of their counselors about their special introductory offer. Call 266-8995.
Keeping you in touch. This is AM 1000. Mutual News. Police investigators in Chicago are sifting through thousands of refund slips, hoping to interview the shopper who returned the latest bottle containing cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules. In Washington Friday, President Reagan signed legislation designed to make it easier for thousands of children of American military men who served in Asia to enter the United States.
At a White House meeting Friday, King Hassan of Morocco delicately tread new ground for an Arab leader and declared that peace and coexistence can be achieved in the Mideast. With leftist guerrillas in control of 10 towns in El Salvador, the country's defense minister says the military will consider a negotiated end to that 3.5-year-old civil war. The Soviet Union and its Eastern Bloc allies urged the United States Friday to resume talks on a nuclear test ban treaty, despite American charges Moscow already violated 2 previous agreements. This is Mike McCleskey, Mutual News.
Hello?
Lydia, would you talk to my class about tampons?
Sure, just get some Percets and any others you want.
There's a difference?
Mm-hmm. Percets have a unique doctor-designed feature for special comfort. Also, they have no bulky applicators. They're very compact.
What about protection?
You can count on them for tampon protection.
And you say Percets have a feature no other tampon has?
Look at the tip. You'll see.
Percets tampons with a unique doctor-designed feature for special comfort. You'll like the difference. Use only as directed.
Bill, it's 1 a.m. You've rehearsed your speech enough. Go to sleep.
I never can before a big meeting, just when I need my rest the most.
Take Compose.
Compose?
Sure helps me drop off.
In cases of occasional sleeplessness, Compose helps you feel drowsy so you can fall asleep. That way, in the morning, you can feel fresher.
Okay, guys, coming.
Good luck, dear.
Thanks to Compose, I'm feeling rested.
A good night's sleep sure pays off.
Compose. Use only as directed.
This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
From the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World for the opening of EPCOT Center, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Here again, Larry King.
Thank you very much, Fred Lowry, and welcome back to more of The Larry King Show. We are going to be going to your phone calls in a couple of minutes because we know you want the opportunity to talk to Red Barber. I will tell you that I wholeheartedly recommend this book. It is a dramatic account of a very important season, not just in baseball, but a season that affected this country, the bringing of Jackie Robinson to baseball. Did you get along with Jackie?
Oh, yes. Our relationship was, I would say, impeccably sound. He was a wonderful person. He and I had a mutual respect.
Was that hard for you based on where you were raised and the kind of values that were placed into you while you were being raised about vis-a-vis black and white?
Well, of course, Larry, I had to change. And I wrote this as honestly as I could in this book, and I had written it in a couple of earlier books. This book that you've been kind enough to mention tonight is the 6th one. I've become more of a writer than a broadcaster. But Mr. Rickey and I were at a Red Cross meeting in 1945 at Bar President John Cashmore's office. And the meeting went a little long, as meetings with volunteers usually do. At that time, I was the fundraising chairman in Brooklyn and was for 2 years, and Mr. Rickey did public relations for the Red Cross. So we left this meeting and we went over to Joe's Restaurant. You know where that was in Borough Hall. And when we got in the restaurant, there was nobody there. It was pretty late. They were trying to close up. We got back in a corner on the table and gave our order, and then Mr. Rickey was sitting there, and he was breaking a roll, and obviously he had something very much on his mind, and finally said, I'm going to tell you something that you can tell your wife, but no one else. He said, I am going to bring a Negro to the Brooklyn Dodgers. Well, then he sat there and he told me the story about how when he was the baseball coach at Ohio Wesleyan, his best player was a Negro boy who was his catcher, Charlie Thomas. And Mr. Rickey said, I took the ball club down to Notre Dame for a series, and we started to register at the old Oliver Hotel. And when this Negro boy started to sign his name, the clerk grabbed the register and jerked it back and said in a loud voice where everyone in the lobby could hear it, we don't register Negroes in this hotel. And Mr. Rickey said, I stepped up and said, but you don't understand, sir. This is the Ohio Wesleyan baseball team. This is our catcher. This is our best player. We're the guests of the University of Notre Dame. He said, I don't care who you are, who he is. He's a Negro, and we don't register Negroes in this hotel. Well, Mr. Rickey said, I thought for a minute I had to do something, and he said, well, now, would it be all right if he doesn't register, but if he uses the other bed in my room? Well, the clerk said, well, I guess so. So Mr. Rickey gave the room key to White, as he told me, and he said, you go up to the room and you wait for me. After I get the squad settled, I'll come up. I'll come straight up. So Mr. Rickey said, when I pushed open the door, there was a splendid young man who was sitting on a chair, and he was tearing at his hands, pulling at them. And he was crying, sobbing. And he said, Mr. Rickey, it's my skin. It's my skin. If I could just pull it off, I'd be like everyone else. And Mr. Rickey, this day in 1945, said, through the years, I have heard that fine boy's cry, and I have been intending to do something about it, and now I am going to do something about it. My family says that I'm too old and not well enough to do it. Mrs. Rickey is opposed to it. She said it's too much. My children are opposed to it. But he said, I'm going to do it. And he said, I have already started the creation of a team called the Brooklyn Brown Dodgers, and I am going to put this team, supposedly to the public, in the Negro Leagues. And I have my best scouts, Soupforth, Sisler, Matthews, and they are combing the world looking for Negro players for the Brown Dodgers. And he said, all of their reports funneled to me. He said, they don't know it. He said, you know it now. But I am looking for a player for the White Dodgers.
How did you feel?
I went home, I was shocked. I was born in Columbus, Mississippi, came over to Sanford, Florida, which used to be, I haven't been up there lately, of course I know Disney World's changed, that used to be as deep south as you could find. And when my family was 10, and I grew up there and went to the University of Florida in Gainesville, and that was deep south. And I had been, as the song in South Pacific, I had been carefully taught. I mean, there was no other way for me to look. Of course I was stunned, completely stunned. So much so that I went home and said to my wife, I blurted out what Mr. Rickey had said, and I said, I think I'll quit. And she said, well, you don't have to quit right now. Let's have a martini and think about it. And, you know, it pays to marry a smart woman. Well, I didn't have to do too much thinking, Larry. I suddenly realized that I had then the best sports announcing job in the world. And also, I'd had a hand in creating that job, and I ought to think a little carefully before I just cast it aside.
Did Robinson have anything to do with changing your values?
No, this was all went on before I knew Robinson, and Ricky didn't know who Robinson was when he told me.
But I mean, affecting the change in you.
Well, wait just a second. Let me tell you this, because this is important. I think.
But you, I'll wait forever.
The first thought was that I got through my head. I'm a slow learner, but I suddenly began to think, because this was serious. And I suddenly thought, well, gee whiz, I didn't have any control over the parents I was born to. I didn't have any control over being born white. I ought to be a little careful about trying to be proud about how people are born. And then I remembered this first World Series that Mutual did in 1935. Chicago at Detroit. The series opened in Detroit, and Judge Landis, the commissioner, had all the broadcasters, all the networks, all the officials in there, and he gave a lecture. Very stern lecture. I will condense it here for the sake of your time, but the gist of his lecture was to the broadcasters. Now, you fellows know how to broadcast, but these ball players out here today know how to broadcast. Don't you try and help them play ball. They don't need your help. These managers know how to manage. Don't you try to manage. You just report what they do. His word was report. You report what the players do, report what the managers do. And the umpires certainly don't need any of your help. You just report what they do. In other words, your job is to report. Well, suddenly, in my thinking, I remembered Landis's words. He was then dead. But they say the voice from the grave is very impelling. I remember that old white-haired man's words in Detroit, 35, saying, report, report. And suddenly there was just nothing to it. I wasn't Mr. Rickey. I wasn't the player who was going to be chosen. I wasn't any of the players who had to play with. All my job was to report. And it was as simple as that. When I met Robinson, there was no problem to it. When I went to the broadcasting booth, there was no problem. I explained it to Connie. There was never a problem in the broadcast. We just reported, and that's all there was to it. And that's all that Robinson wanted, and all Rickey wanted, and all the public wanted.
You've been heard on a lot of great stations in New York. WOR had the Dodgers. WHN then had the Dodgers.
Yeah.
And now WHN will have the Mets. Mutual owns WHN. It's all like a cycle coming back.
Well, speaking of cycles coming back, did you arrange to have Woody Herman here just because I was going to be here?
No.
Did you know that in World War II, when Old Gold had a half hour on the CBS network, they began it with Sammy Kaye, and Woody Herman was the next band, and I was the announcer? He even wrote a song called Red Top for me.
We arranged it just for that reason tonight, Red. We'll be back with your phone calls for Red Barber. We're at Disney World, and we'll return following these messages. Friends, this is the last night of the Larry King special offer for the sporting news. It's all over tonight, Friday night, Saturday morning, October 22nd. The last time you can call in 1-800-648-5000 and order 31 weeks of the sporting news for $11.31. That's less than 37 cents a copy. It is the lowest price per copy regularly available anywhere. The sporting news, last night. You're not going to hear this offer on Monday. The best coverage of sporting events, the best publication ever in sports, less than 37 cents a copy. Will you please call now, 1-800-648-5000. You will not hear that number or this offer mentioned again. 1-800-648-5000. 31 weeks for $11.31. This is the last night. 1-800-648-5000.
This is Gregory Peck speaking for the Alliance to Save Energy. These days, it's more important than ever to save energy and to save money. The Alliance offers you a brochure which will help you do both. In fact, the dozen energy-saving tips it gives you could cut as much as 25% off your home energy use. And that could add up to hundreds of dollars a year. For instance, the Alliance advises you to insulate places you may have missed the first time around, like the attic door. It also suggests lowering the water heater temperature to 120 degrees. Best of all, the brochure will show you that saving energy makes sense, dollars and cents. Send for this brochure today. Write the Alliance to Save Energy, Box 57200, Washington, D.C., 20037. That's Box 57200, Washington, D.C., 20037. A public service message from the Alliance to Save Energy and the Advertising Council.
From the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World for the opening of EPCOT Center, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Here again, Larry King.
Thank you very much, Fred. It is now your opportunity at home to talk to a living legend in the broadcasting business, a man that everybody who goes into this business, if you want to be a sports broadcaster, you hold the name Red Barber high. If you set him as a model, you can do lots worse than even attaining a portion of what he attained in his career. Red Barber is our guest. His new book, by the way, published by Doubleday, is 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball. There's never been a baseball season like it, and Red covers it start to finish, and he was there for all of it. We're now going to go, by the way, during that World Series, Red had two broadcasts in that series that are part of great moments in sports. Every time they ever play an anthology of great broadcasts, there's Red Barber's description of Cookie Lavagetto breaking up Bill Bevan's no-hitter, and Al Gianfrido's catch of a seeming home run by Joe DiMaggio. Both are part of baseball lore. We now go to your phone calls for Red Barber, and we start with Kunkel, Ohio. Hello.
Hello. Red Barber, I was going to ask you about your lack of enthusiasm for the integration of the major leagues, but you have discussed that, and rather than hang up, I want to congratulate you for your candor. We hear a great deal from people who speak as though they have never been prejudiced, do not know what it means to feel prejudiced, and it really doesn't help the rest of us who have to wrestle with our own prejudices. And so I congratulate you for encouraging all of us to face our own true feelings, past and present. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And this brings to mind, there's a wonderful man down in Tallahassee, a friend of mine, Jake Gaither, the legendary coach at Florida A&M. And I've had the opportunity to interview Coach Gaither once or twice, and he said something which I would like to sort of include myself a little bit, judging by the comment that just came from Ohio. Jake Gaither has often said that the best friend that a black man has is a converted white man. And I think maybe the best way about the Robinson thing was I did experience a genuine conversion.
With Red Barber, we go to Jersey City, New Jersey. Hello.
Another great show, and I just want to say that I was a Giants fan, and still am, but there was no broadcaster like that man, and he really called the game, and I'm going back to when he used to do the Dodgers and the Cardinals on ticker tape in 41. You would think you were right at the ballpark in St. Louis with Mort Cooper and Whitlow Wyatt, and it was just great, and I'm just sorry that he doesn't do it anymore, because when I listen now, the other guys, with the exception, as he said before, Vinny Scully, they said, go back and explain the play. You never had to explain the play with him. You could be blind. I'm not, but you could be blind, and you knew what was going on. And I'd like to ask Fred one other thing.
Yeah.
Does he think that you'll ever have a rivalry like you had when the Giants played the Dodgers in Brooklyn or New York?
No, I was talking earlier about the importance of the ball club to Brooklyn particularly, and then, of course, New York had a ball club. See, that was the only time that you had two teams in the same city in the same league.
Well, God bless you, Red, and keep it up, because I love you.
And you mentioned Cooper and Wyatt in 1941. I don't know whether you were old enough to get the impact of this or not when you were a boy in Brooklyn, but the last time that the Dodgers played the Cardinals in 41 and the pennant was at stake, Wyatt and Cooper were the pitchers, the last ball game. And big Mort Cooper didn't give up a base hit until one man was out in the 8th inning. And this game was going along nothing and nothing because Whitlow Wyatt was also just as able. He'd given up a few hits, but he hadn't allowed anybody to dent the plate. And in the 8th inning with one out, Dixie Walker doubled, the first Dodger hit. And Walker got down at second base, and this is something that the fans couldn't know unless they were told. Dixie told me later. He said, I looked down and got the sign for a curveball from catcher Cooper. And I flashed it to Billy Herman, the batter. And he said if Billy Herman knew a curve was coming, that was just as certain as death in taxes. And Herman hit the curve for a double. Walker scored, and that was a ball game 1-0, and the pennant, 1941.
With Red Barber, we go to Plainview, New York. Hello.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Comic show, Larry.
Thank you.
Mr. Barber, all I can say to you is that I would much rather listen to you broadcast the game on radio than listen and watch anybody do one on TV today.
Well, thank you.
I have a few questions.
Okay.
One, do you think if Jackie Robinson had come up at an earlier age, he might have been able to budge off shortstop? And my second question is, how do you compare today's ball players to those of the 50s and 60s?
Okay. All right. First, let me say this, and I have thought about this. Often people say, well, isn't it a shame that Robinson didn't come up as a much younger man? He could have had more years in the big leagues and set more records. Let me balance that by saying maybe Robinson needed all of the maturity that he brought with him at the time he came. Otherwise, he could not have endured spiritually what he had to do. And as far as other ball players are concerned, we have as many fine individual players today as we have ever had. I don't think there's any question about that. But this last World Series, I think, demonstrated that we have there was a lot of bad baseball played in the last World Series. Things like pitchers not covering first base. Things like the pitcher in the fourth game dropping a routine throw at first that let Milwaukee get an extra out in that inning and get 5 hits and 6 runs. And instead of the Cardinals winning the World Series in a short time, they had to strain for 7. And you can't, you had 16 ball clubs when I got to the big leagues. And they had trouble then having fine teams for the two first divisions. Now you have baseball expanding to 26 teams. So, of course, you have far more ball players. You have fewer minor leagues. You don't have players schooled in the minor leagues as they used to be. So, of course, you will see a Sparky Anderson. At one time, working with Vin Scully on this last World Series, Sparky said, well, I hope they don't photograph these games and show them around the country to kids and say this is the way baseball ought to be played.
With Red Barber, we go to Carthage, Missouri. Hello.
Yes, thank you, Larry. Oh, Red Barber, great to hear you again.
I used to enjoy you back, besides those World Series in the past, CBS used to pick up your Saturday home games, but they would delay them by 2 hours, They wouldn't start them until 1:30 here, 11:30 up there and 1:30 here, and I often wondered why they didn't, do them live. And then also, now, you talked about Vince Scully. He said on this World Series, quoting you, that the raindrops followed the throw over to first base, And a while ago when you were talking about, did you say NBC and CBS and Mutual all had the World Series back in the 35? Do them live. And then also, now, you talked about Vince Scully. He said on this World Series, quoting you, that the raindrops followed the throw over to first base, And a while ago when you were talking about, did you say NBC and CBS and Mutual all had the World Series back in the 35?
Yeah, would you elaborate on that? Anyone could do the World Series as long as the commissioner gave permission. There were no exclusive rights.
The first exclusive World Series was on Mutual when Gillette bought it in 1939. And again, Bob Elson and I did it.
That was the first time where no other network was...
The first time it was exclusive, 1939.
In other words, you might have 6 guys in radio booths all doing the game?
Oh, it did. Until then, sure. You'd have all the networks. NBC would have its crew, CBS would have its crew, and Mutual would have its crew.
We'll be right back with Red Barber. The book is 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball. First, this message.
From the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World for the opening of EPCOT Center, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Here again, Larry King.
Our guest is the best that ever was at this game, Red Barber. At the bottom of the next hour, we'll meet the great Woody Herman. We go back to the phone calls for Red Barber and Philadelphia. Hello.
Larry, first, thank you for having Red on. And Red, thank you for being on.
I'm delighted that Larry is letting me be on.
Well, it's just an honor to speak to you. And I have 2 quick questions, and then I'm going to get off here and give other people a chance.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first one is, what would be the relationship between, in baseball managers, between a guy that isn't formally educated and one that is? That is, a college graduate. Might he not, or might he make a better manager? And because so many of the managers are not well educated, I remember you saying that Chuck Gresham could hardly read. And I wonder how much that has to do with the managing of a baseball club, whether that would enhance it, the intellectual...
You think the better educated, the better manager, Red?
What do you think?
I don't think so at all, because baseball itself is the education that is important. And also, the one thing that a manager has to have, he can't learn in college. A manager has to be able to grade his ball players. He has to know what they can do and what they can't do. He has to have an almost infallible memory. He has to have total recall. He has to remember what other players around the league can do and what they can't do, and what other pitchers pitch and what they don't pitch, how other managers manage and how they don't manage. And further, a manager has to have a spiritual thing in which ball players respect him, and they know that he is fair, and they know that he is firm, and they believe in him. No, the qualities for that sort of executive leadership you can't get from a book or from the halls of higher learning. I don't think it makes a bit of difference how much formal education you have.
Thank you very much. With Red Barber, we go to Mobile, Alabama. Hello.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Red Barber. I was born in Brooklyn in 1936, Ocean Parkway. I made a scrap up like Larry King of the 1947 World Series between the Dodgers and the Yankees. And I now am professor of psychology here at the University of South Alabama to show you what a small world it is. The baseball coach of USA Jaguars, Eddie Stanky, the great second baseman. The question, Red, is this. Could you possibly name the players of the 1947 Brooklyn Dodgers who went into that World Series with any backups you could possibly remember? I'd appreciate it.
Well, every one of the players is in the book, sir. The book covers the whole season. We could run around the infield. There was Hodges. Hodges was backup catcher.
You had Bruce Edwards was the catcher. Hugh Casey was the final pitcher that afternoon. He pitched. He made one pitch to Tommy Henry, got a double play, and was the winning pitcher on one pitch. Pee Wee Reese, of course, was the great man at shortstop.
Spider Jorgensen was the third, rookie third baseman.
And the first baseman, you know, was Jackie Robinson. Robinson never played first base until they gave him a glove, occasionally at spring training down in Havana. Jorgensen was the third baseman. That's right.
It's all in the book. Back to the phones for Red Barber in Crystal City, Virginia. Hello.
Yeah, Mr. Barber, I was reading something in a book called Baseball in America by Robert Smith that came out several years ago.
Yes.
And he was talking about an incident that occurred at the end of Jackie's career, and I wonder maybe if you could shed some light on it. He, apparently he was ready to quit baseball, and it was a story that he was going to join the New York Giants to play under Leo DeRocher. And apparently he kept the story under his hat until it came out in a magazine which had paid in advance for the right to first publicize the fact that Jackie was going to quit baseball to take a job in television and radio. And apparently many sports writers got very angry at this because they thought it was cheap commercialism or something to sell news like that. Do you know anything about that incident? Do you remember that? Or?
Well, I know something about it. I was no longer connected with the Brooklyn Ball Club. I had my last year at Brooklyn was 53, and I went over to Yankee Stadium. But what happened was that Walter O'Malley traded Robinson to the Giants, sold him to the Giants, and I think the trade was for money and for a relief pitcher called Dick Littlefield. And Robinson didn't say yay or nay about whether he was going to go to the Giants or not, and to the ball club he hated and work under DeRocher, whom he hated. But Robinson made a deal, and I think it was with Look magazine, that for a certain amount of money he would give them the exclusive story that he was not going to the Giants and he was quitting baseball. And, of course, the writers were incensed because only the magazine had the story. And if you want newspaper men to be angry, just let them not get an exclusive and be left on the outside. And also, a lot of them have been writing that, well, they took the cue, I think, from Buzzy Bavasi. Bavasi said, oh, don't worry, Robinson will show up with the Giants because when they offer that money, he won't be able to turn it down, the money that Stoneham is going to offer him. And a lot of the writers had written that. So when Robinson's story came out, it made a lot of people, look sort of awkward with egg on their faces, and they just didn't like it, but that was Jack's way of doing it, and he didn't want to play anymore, and certainly not with the Giants.
So he would have quit no matter what team he was traded to, right?
I think that Robinson would have stayed on another year at Brooklyn, but he certainly wasn't going to strain himself to get in condition again. He was no longer a young ball player. You know, it hurts to get back into physical condition to play baseball, go through spring training. He wasn't going to do it with the Giants and with DeRocher.
My guest is Red Barber. We're going to pause for news and a word from your local stations. We'll come back with 25 minutes to go with the old redhead, and then we'll meet the great Woody Herman, and those two are linked as well. Red Barber's new book is 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball. Monday night, we'll come to you from Philadelphia, and one of our guests will be Ezra Stone, the original Henry Aldridge, and Mayor William Green, the mayor of Philadelphia. Next Tuesday night, Hamilton Jordan will be with us, and John Kelly, Olympic champion and brother of the late Grace Kelly. And that's from the Franklin Plaza Hotel. It's WCAU's 60th birthday. We'll be back after the news with Red Barber. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System, your network for news and sports.
From the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World for the grand opening of EPCOT Center, Mutual Radio presents The Larry King Show, featuring guests from around the world and calls from all across America. And now, Network Radio's favorite interviewer, Larry King.
Thank you very much, Fred Lowry. Welcome back to another hour of The Larry King Show, coast to coast on Mutual, coming to you from the Contemporary Hotel at Walt Disney World, the official opening weekend of EPCOT. Our special guest, Red Barber, in a half hour. Woody Herman will be with us. And Monday and Tuesday night, we'll be coming to you from Philadelphia. It was nice guesting today with John R. Gambling on his fine show on WOR this afternoon. They were here broadcasting, and John is in the studio audience here with us tonight. We're going to get right back to your calls for Red Barber. At the bottom of the hour, we're going to meet the great Woody Herman. We go back to the calls and New York City. Hello.
Good evening, Larry.
Hi.
And Red, may I say, like Mr. King, I grew up listening to you, and I had a privilege about 16 years ago when you were on with Win Elliott one night of telling you that I think you did as much of teaching me the game of baseball.
Yeah, but last year I was fascinated. Now, you're talking about you did the World Series 35 for Mutual, but in 36, I believe you did the Giant Yankee Series for NBC.
That's right.
And when the strike was on last year, NBC dug out a bunch of their old World Series. Most of them were, from 57. But the first one they did was the 1936 series, and I was fascinated, first of all, about the quality. And secondly, there was one comment that stuck in my mind, your comment about the Yankee Clipper. And that, if you remember, I think it was his first year in the big leagues, 36. And your comment about, I wonder if you remember, you said about how much he seemed to enjoy playing the game.
Yes, you've got a good memory, and I heard that rebroadcast.
Did they pay you for it, Red? Did they pay you for it?
No, Larry, I didn't get anything for extra for doing the World Series in 1935, 36, 37, 38.
I remember the year you didn't do the World Series because they didn't pay enough.
Well, anyhow, those years I didn't get paid, it's not as bad as it sounds. I was on staff for WLW, and they put me on the World Series, and I didn't expect to get anything extra, and it wasn't all blatant commercial or anything like that.
But I remember when the announcers were supposed to think it was a great privilege, and therefore they didn't have to be paid any kind of money to do it.
Well, when Gillette took over in 1939, Craig Smith, the advertising manager, took the position that it was just an honor to be told that you were going to be on the World Series. And he would never discuss with you beforehand what you would be paid. He wouldn't give you a chance to negotiate anything else. And this went on from 1939 right on through the World Series of 1952. And after the World Series of 52, Larry, when I got my check a couple of weeks afterwards and found out what I was getting, and that was all out coast-to-coast television then. I mean, it was in the modern age. I got $200 a game. And suddenly I felt ashamed of myself. I'd negotiated in good faith with everybody else under the sun, but I hadn't been allowed to by the great Gillette Safety Razor Company. So I notified my agent and told my wife then, a year ahead of time, I said, next year, if I'm announced on the World Series, I am certainly going to have the privilege of knowing before I go into the World Series what I'm going to get. Well, when I raised that point, Craig Smith hit the ceiling. And he said, you're going to get what you got last year, take it or leave it. I said, well, I'll leave it.
With Red Barber, the author of 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball, we go to Newport, Kentucky. Hello.
Hello. Red?
Yes.
Got three questions for you. I'm quite a baseball fan in the Redlegs.
Okay.
Who do you... Of course, we had the great Wade Hoyt as a baseball announcer here. I'd like to hear your comments about him.
And he was a crackerjack.
And also, who would you consider to be the greatest ball player you ever seen in modern day, say from 1940 on?
Who was, Red?
Willie Mays.
I'd have to agree with you there. And also, who would you say would be the greatest team since 1940?
Greatest individual team you ever saw?
It's hard to pick an individual team, except I might... some of those Brooklyn teams seemed awfully awesome, but they were always weak at two places. They were always weak for an extra starting pitcher, Larry, and they never did quite have the left fielder. I would think the Joe McCarthy teams that the Yankees, when they won 4 straight and were sweeping the World Series in 4 straight, I believe that was the best collection as a team I ever saw.
Did you ever see a better third baseman than Billy Cox?
Billy Cox was a wonderful third baseman, but Clete Boyer was marvelous at Yankee Stadium, and of course Robinson at Baltimore was simply superb. He was a vacuum cleaner out there. I've been very fortunate. I saw Pie Traynor, but he was finishing, and then to see Billy Cox, then to see Boyer, then to see Brooks Robinson. You're very rich to see men like that.
With Red Barber, we go to Montclair, New Jersey. Hello.
Hello, Larry. Great show and a great week in Florida.
Thank you.
Red Barber, I've enjoyed him for many years. Red, just wanted to thank you for many years of great baseball enjoyment. I had 2 questions I wanted to ask you. I go back to, I tell my kids about it, but they don't remember this. You remember a guy called Happy Felton?
Yes, Happy Felton did the Not Whole Gang for the play-by-play at Ebbets Field.
I watch him every day.
Yeah, that was a real treat before a game.
Yes.
I've always wondered, Your relationship when you went to the Yankees, because I always consider Red Barber the greatest and Mel Allen second. What was your relationship with Mel Allen when you got to the Yankees?
Our relationship was absolutely perfect. A lot of the writers had written during the winter between 1953 and 1954 that was going to be a bloody contest up at the stadium when I got up there. After all, you have to remember I'd been a principal announcer for 20 years, 5 at Cincinnati and 15 at Brooklyn. And Mel was the principal announcer at Yankee Stadium and had been since he got out of the Army after World War II. But as it happened, I was doing an entirely different piece of work than I'd ever done before. I did work that Mel didn't do. I did a 15-minute television interview before the game and a 15-minute television interview show after the games, as well as a couple of innings of play-by-play on radio and a couple on television. So Mel and I got along fine. We worked together 11 years at the stadium, and I can't imagine how our relationship could have been better.
That also may have been in the history of baseball the best broadcasts ever done. I mean, the two of you working together. The Yankees were, well, I want to say fortunate they were adroit at having you.
I would say, Larry, again, I don't wish to sound egotistical, but as far as I'm concerned, the team that we had at Brooklyn of Connie Desmond, Vince Scully, and myself. And then when I first went to the stadium, Mel Allen, Jim Woods, and myself. Jim Woods was a crackerjack.
Two pretty good teams.
Yes.
Glendale, we go to Glendale, California for Red Barber. Hello.
Hello, I'm a native of Cincinnati, and I've lived out here 20 years, and I'm an old-timer. I remember Red Barber and how unhappy the Cincinnati people were when he left. But now I also remember Wade Hoyt, and I heard the man ask about Wade Hoyt, and I just wonder, is he still living?
Yes, Wade is very hale and hearty. He was born in '99, and he's right there in Cincinnati. And
that's good.
Sure, and he is maybe the best baseball raconteur I ever heard. Certainly he's telling stories about Babe Ruth.
Thank you very much. We'll be right back. We have about 12 minutes to go with Red, and then we'll meet the great Woody Herman. Any broadcast can bring you Red Barber and Woody Herman in the same night is easy one to do. Red Barber's new book is 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball. It is a brilliant look at an incredible season that's much larger than just the world of sports. It's published by Doubleday. We'll be back right after these messages.
Portions of this program are being brought to you by the makers of V8 Vegetable Juice and by International Harvester.
In the field and over the road, International will be there to carry the load. We're not giving in, we're going on.
Gordon Haynes believes we're going on because we're helping him go on with his custom harvest operation. He's invested over $600,000 in international axial flow combines alone. He knows our combines can bring in more bushels per day and more bushels per gallon than any other combine in the field. That's why people like Gordon Haynes believe in our future, because we're helping them build their future. We're not giving in, we're going on.
In the field and over the road, International will be there to carry the load. We're not giving in, we're going on.
International Harvester.
Friends, this is the last night of the Larry King special offer for the sporting news. It's all over tonight, Friday night, Saturday morning, October 22nd. The last time you can call in 1-800-648-5000 and order 31 weeks of the sporting news for $11.31. That's less than 37 cents a copy. It is the lowest price per copy regularly available anywhere. The sporting news, last night. You're not going to hear this offer on Monday. The best coverage of sporting events, the best publication ever in sports, less than 37 cents a copy. Will you please call now 1-800-648-5000. You will not hear that number or this offer mentioned again. 1-800-648-5000. 31 weeks for $11.31. This is the last night. 1-800-648-5000.
From the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World for the opening of EPCOT Center, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Here again, Larry King.
Thank you very much, Fred Lowry. Our special guest is Red Barber. We're going to get right back to the calls, and we go to Dillion, New York. Hello.
Yes, this is a beautiful evening. I was born in Brooklyn and raised in Ebbetsfield a good many years ago, and this is a night I'll never forget. I don't think that any other ballpark in the whole world throughout the history of baseball will ever equal the charisma of Ebbetsfield. And boy, the old redhead sounds tremendous. I wish he was on the air right now.
Me too.
And after I hang up, don't do it until I hang up and I can get back to the radio. But after I get back to the radio, give me a minute or two after I finish talking. I want to hear him say, "There's pandemonium in Brooklyn tonight."
I think you're booking for the job, sir. You did that pretty good. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Red, what was, of course, it's hard for me to ask because I live there myself, so special about that ballpark?
The ballpark, first off, was very small, Larry, as you know. That was the smallest ballpark in the big leagues. The fans along third base and first base were closer to the ball players than any other part in the big leagues. You were so close to them in Brooklyn that you could almost reach out and shake hands with them. You could see the beads of perspiration. You could hear everything they said. You could hear the conversation between the plate umpire and the catcher and the batter. It was an intimate ballpark. But again, what made it so special was the impact of 3 million rabid souls in Brooklyn who worshipped, who lived and died by that ball club. That was Brooklyn's answer against Manhattan. That was Brooklyn's pride. There were a lot of dinners that weren't eaten in Brooklyn when the Dodgers lost, and appetites soared when the Dodgers won.
With Red Barber, we go to Ben Vernon, Texas. Hello.
Yes, Vernon, Texas.
Yes, go ahead.
My wife and I shall never forget a cold winter weekend coming up on 3 years now when we sat in our living room and listened to you read to us your book, Rhubarb and the Catbird Seat, on Talking Book. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and we have been wanting ever since we had the opportunity to read the book to say thank you.
You're blind, sir?
Well, bless your heart, because one of the most satisfying things that I have been able to do was to read 4 of my books as talking books.
Oh, you did your own books for the talking
Yes. Larry, I gave my wife a copy of Rhubarb and the Catbird Seat, my daughter a copy, and you a copy. Those were the copies I had. And that will tell you folks listening in of the relationship that Larry and I have had for many, many years, going back to when we were both in Miami. When I was in Miami, Larry, the talking book people in New York wrote and wanted to know would I come to New York and read Rhubarb and the Catbird Seat. And there was no way I could go up there because you could only read about an hour a day, and the vocal cords began to get a little frayed. And I couldn't go up there and spend that time reading it. So I said to them, I said, well, I've got a tape recorder here, the WGBS, the radio station that has furnished me, and I'll read it for you in Miami. And they said, no, we've never had a book read outside of our studios. And I said, well, that's too bad. I'm sorry. Then they came back and said, well, wait a minute, how about reading a chapter and setting it up as an audition? I did, and they wrote back and said, well, read it. So I read it in my house in Key Biscayne with all the noises that around the house. I have 2 cats that used to jump up on the desk. It was spring, and the door was open. There was a mockingbird sitting outside, and every so often he'd sound off, and that's in the book, as you folks who read the book will remember. And I've often said this set a whole new pattern. From then on, writers read their books wherever they could. But I said, I broke the sterile silence of the studio.
With Red Barber, we go to Sanford, Florida. Hello.
Hi, I'm calling from Red's former hometown in Sanford. I was wondering, first of all, we hear a lot of the things about Jackie Robinson's experiences in the major leagues. Can Red share anything about his experiences in the minor leagues when he trained in Sanford with Montreal?
From what, I was not there. I was with the Dodgers. They were training that spring over in Daytona Beach. But as Robinson wrote in his book, his experiences in Sanford were almost drastically negative, and Mr. Rickey had to get him out of there.
I heard he had quite a bad time here.
That's right.
But he had a great year in Montreal, didn't he? They won the
yes.
World Series.
Well, when he got to Montreal, he broke that league apart.
Yeah.
He led it in everything.
Thank you very much. With Red Barber, we go to Columbus, Ohio. Hello.
Red Barber, I just want to tell you how delighted I am that you're on this evening. In 1947, I was an Eastern Pennsylvania farm boy. I just moved to New York. And there were so many almost unbearably hot summer evenings that were made completely bearable by your broadcast. I wanted to ask you a question about Jackie Robinson. I thought he was one of the most fascinating players I've ever seen.
Yes, he was.
In what ballparks did he have the most problems with the fans because of his race? Was St. Louis one of the most difficult places? I think I can recall an occasion when Jackie put his hand to his throat to indicate to an umpire he didn't have the nerve to call a close call in his favor.
What was the worst that he read?
That was at St. Louis, and the umpire was Bill Stewart. And I recall what I said on the air. I said, well, apparently Stewart does not have the patience of Job. And,
Red, a lot of people forget how many attendance records Robinson would break that year. Everywhere he went.
Oh, they broke all the records at Evans Field. They broke them at every park in the league. They had overflow crowds. They even set attendance records at St. Louis despite a transit strike.
He was generally treated warmly by the fans, wasn't he?
Robinson was the biggest gate attraction in baseball since Babe Ruth. And as a general rule, he was well accepted by the fans. He had problems with some of the St. Louis Cardinals and with some of the Philadelphia Phillies led by the manager, Ben Chapman. And that is in the book, and I've tried to be careful in using the quotes about it, because you have to be careful when you're writing something about emotional situations. And I quoted Robinson, and I quoted Road Secretary Harold Parrott, and I quoted writers from the New York Times.
Thank you very much. With Red Barber, we go to Philadelphia. Hello.
Hello. I don't think there's any question that Red and Mr. Scully and Connie Desmond were best ever in what they did. I'd like for Red to talk about Connie Desmond. I knew him. I knew his work. I used to try to get WHN from West Virginia, and there was a great big old Mexican station that would overwhelm the station, but I'd stick with it anyway. So would you talk about Desmond? And the last thing I want to say is that about Wade Hoyt, when they have that 2-hour and 35-minute delay in the series, I wish they'd had Wade Hoyt there, because he just is wonderful with those rain delays. I miss him terribly.
I wish they'd had him, too, because he could have filled the whole thing and done it very capably. Let me say about Connie Desmond. There is as much an art to being an associate broadcaster as there is to being the principal broadcaster, because the associate broadcaster has to be good enough to step in and do the whole thing if the principal broadcaster is not there. He's got to step in cold and do 1 or 2 innings. He's got to be filling in, and he has to have a spiritual depth in which he is willing to do that kind of work. And Desmond was simply the best associate broadcaster that I could imagine. It was a joy to work with him, and we didn't have to plan anything. I think we just sensed it. The broadcast just balanced between us, Larry.
We have a couple minutes left, Red. A couple of things I'd like to ask. You invented a lot of phrases full of Brooklyn's, of FOB, sitting in the catbird seat, etc. All these happen off the top of your head?
No, I think we're all pretty much creatures, repositories of our history. Sitting in the catbird seat goes back to a penny ante poker game in Cincinnati. I couldn't win a pot, so I decided I would say it was dealer's choice. I'd say, well, we're going to play stud poker, and I'm going to raise everybody. I'm going to run a pot. I'm going to raise everybody. Well, I got everybody out but one fellow across the table. His name was Frank Cope. And I had a pair of 8s showing, and he had his first card up was an ace. And then when the moment of truth came, he turned up his whole card. There was another ace. He had aces back to back. So as he raked in the pot, he smiled and said, Red, thank you for all those raises, because from the start, I was sitting in the catbird seat. And I figured in as much as I'd paid for it, I might as well use it.
Red, You look back on being a legend, being alive and being a legend?
I don't look back, Larry. The thing about life is to look forward. I appreciate the fact that I have been very blessed. But I've got some things to do. I've got another book to write, and if that's any good, to be a guest on your show next year.
Red, you could take this show if you want. It's an honor knowing. I will add a note here. There's a dear friend of both of ours, Bill O'Donnell, who's very ill now, and he's in Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. And things have not turned well.
He was one of the fine young announcers to suddenly come on the scene.
And I hope Bill, I just can't tell you enough how I feel about him, but I will tell you something about you. Bill O'Donnell told me that one of the greatest thrills he ever had in broadcasting baseball was a tap on the back of his shoulder one night. And he turned around, and a gentleman said, "You're doing a fine job, son." And that gentleman was Red Barber.
Yes, I was off a few innings. I stood back with the booth and was listening to him broadcast, and I was very impressed with him. And I join you in your prayers, Larry.
Red, I thank you very much. An honor seeing you, an honor sitting with you, an honor broadcasting with you.
Well, in this life, you don't have many good friends over the years, and it's a pleasure to be back with you.
Red Barber, ladies and gentlemen, he was only the best. And the book is 1947, the year all hell broke loose in baseball. Mr. Barber writes as well as he speaks. The book is brilliant. It is much more important than just a book about a year. It's about Jackie Robinson, about a tumultuous season. It's about a changing America. Red Barber. We'll meet one of the legends of American music, Woody Herman, after the news headlines.